Now listen to me, because I came here with the word burning in my spirit. There's a shaking in the land, and you can see it in the way leaders speak, in the way nations react, in the way companies rise and fall. I'm talking about a warning that's been sounded, a warning that tells you more than what's on the surface. See, sometimes when a man says he's afraid, it's not about what's in front of him, it's about what's behind the fear, the truth. That power feels threatened. And right now, there's a spotlight on a people, a nation, a skill set, a vision that's causing the mighty to tremble. Oh yes, I'm talking about why Trump fears Indians and the truth behind his warning to Google and Microsoft. This ain't just politics. This is a lesson about influence, stewardship, and the destiny God places on individuals and nations. So lean in, because we're going to peel back the layers. When you look across the globe right now, there is a wave of innovation coming out of India and from the Indian diaspora that is rewriting the playbook of the marketplace. And I'm not just talking about small breakthroughs or incremental progress. No, I'm talking about game-changing, industry-shaping, destiny-altering moves that cause the giants of Silicon Valley to take notice. See, you can't talk about Google. You can't talk about Microsoft. You can't even talk about the cutting edge of artificial intelligence without bumping right into the fingerprints of Indian ingenuity. And that's not an accident. That's a move of preparation meeting opportunity. Let's take a moment to understand something. Innovation is not just about having a good idea. Anybody can dream up a concept while sitting on the couch. Innovation is about taking an idea, breathing into it, discipline, strategy, and execution until it becomes something that changes lives. And the truth is, Indians have shown the world how to take knowledge, often learned in one part of the world, and adapt it to solve problems in another. That's not just technical skill, that's vision. And vision, my friend, will make room for you in places you never thought you'd stand. Now, why does this matter? Because whenever a group rises to the top of an arena where others have long held dominance, it disrupts the power balance. And disruption always makes somebody nervous. That nervousness can come out as warnings, speeches, and policies. But if you look deeper, what you're seeing is an acknowledgement that something powerful is at work. And make no mistake, the rise of Indian CEOs, Indian engineers, Indian entrepreneurs at the helm of billion-dollar companies is not a coincidence. It's a demonstration of what happens when talent is stewarded with diligence over time. Think about it. Sundar Pichai at Google, Satya Nadella at Microsoft, Arvind Krishna at IBM. These are not just job titles. These are seats of influence. When you have multiple leaders from the same background guiding the direction of global technology, it tells you that there's a deep reservoir of skill and leadership being tapped into. And that's exactly why it gets attention at the highest levels of politics and business. People fear what they cannot control, and they respect what they cannot deny. But here's the other side of it. This rise didn't happen overnight. Behind the headlines and corporate announcements are decades of investment in education, in adaptability, in relentless pursuit of excellence. It's about a culture that values learning, that pushes the next generation to aim higher, that isn't afraid to cross borders physically and intellectually to achieve something great. And when you combine that with the digital age where knowledge and collaboration move faster than borders can contain, you get a force that cannot be ignored. Let's not miss the bigger lesson here. God gives gifts to individuals, to communities, to nations. And when those gifts are recognized and nurtured, they will make a way for you before kings, presidents, and CEOs. The rise of Indian innovation is a testimony to the principle that your starting point does not determine your destiny. Some of these leaders came from small towns, modest homes, places where resources were limited, but determination was abundant. And when you add faithfulness to the equation, showing up, giving your best, refusing to settle for less, the results speak so loud that even those who oppose you have to acknowledge. Verse 5. So when you hear fear in the voices of those in power, don't just hear the fear, hear the confession that something is happening that they didn't plan for, didn't control, and can't stop. The confession that innovation is no longer the monopoly of one place, one people, one system, and that, my friend, is why the rise of Indian innovation is not just a corporate story, it's a story about destiny unfolding on a global stage. When God gives you something, it's never just for you to keep in your pocket and brag about. No, he gives it to you to use, to multiply, to steward. And that word stewardship is where so many people miss their blessing. Because stewardship is not ownership. Ownership says, this is mine, I can do what I want. Stewardship says, this is God's, and I've been entrusted with it for a season. That means how you handle it, how you protect it, how you grow it is a reflection of the one who put it in your hands. And when we talk about the rise of Indian innovation, we are looking at a masterclass in stewardship over talent and opportunity. Talent by itself is like a seed. You can keep it in the packet and let it dry up, or you can put it in the ground, water it, expose it to light, and watch it grow into something fruitful. In so many communities, talent gets wasted because stewardship is missing. But when you look at how Indians, both in India and across the diaspora, have taken the seeds of education, skill, and creativity, you see what happens when stewardship becomes a way of life. They take what they've been given and work it, stretch it, improve it, until it becomes something that can compete on any stage in the world. And here's what's important. Stewardship is not just about managing resources when they're abundant. It's about managing resources when they're scarce. Many of the people now leading some of the most powerful tech companies in the world started with very little. They didn't have high-tech labs in their schools. They didn't grow up surrounded by wealth and infrastructure, but they had a sense of responsibility for what they did have. If it was one computer for an entire classroom, they made the most of it. If it was books that had been passed down for years, they studied them until the pages wore out. That's stewardship. Not making excuses for lack, but finding ways to maximize what's in your hand. Stewardship also means knowing that opportunity is not guaranteed to come around twice. When that door opens, you don't tiptoe through it. You walk in prepared. And preparation doesn't start when the door opens. It starts in the quiet seasons when no one is clapping for you. Many of these innovators and leaders were doing the work long before anyone was watching. They were building skills, learning languages, mastering technology, so that when the global market came calling, they could answer with excellence. That is the spiritual principle in motion. To whom much is given, much will be required. But to those who are faithful over a little, more will be given. Now let's make this plain. Stewardship is not just about protecting what you have, it's about expanding it. That's why you see Indian entrepreneurs starting small and scaling up, taking risks that multiply their impact. It's why you see Indian engineers not just following orders, but designing the systems that will be used for decades. They are taking what's been placed in their hands and asking, how can I make this better? How can I grow this? How can I position this so that it creates new opportunities for others? The reason that this makes certain people in positions of power nervous is because stewardship creates sustainability. If you can steward your talent, you're not dependent on someone else's charity. If you can steward your opportunity, you're not at the mercy of someone else's timetable. That independence means you can set your own direction. And that's what changes the balance of power. The more Indians steward their skills and their influence well, the less control external forces have over them. And when you're not controlled, you can lead. Stewardship also multiplies beyond the individual. A well-stewarded life becomes an example to others. It says, if I could take this little and turn it into something great, so can you. It inspires a culture of diligence, responsibility, and excellence that spills over into the next generation. That's why the rise of Indian innovation is not just about a few standout leaders. It's about an entire network of people lifting each other up, creating systems of mentorship, education, and opportunity that keep the cycle going. When God moves a person, he often moves more than just the person. He moves the whole environment they step into. And that's what happens when immigrant leadership begins to take root in the corridors of corporate power. It's not just about one man or one woman getting a job at the top. It's about the ripple effect that leadership has on the culture, the priorities, and the vision of the organization. And when we talk about Indians leading global giants like Google, Microsoft, IBM, and beyond, we are seeing not just appointments, we are seeing transformations that flow from the top all the way down to the grassroots of these companies. Leadership is influence, plain and simple. You don't lead because you have a title. You lead because your decisions shape the direction of others. And immigrant leadership brings a unique kind of influence, the influence of perspective. When you've lived in more than one cultural world, you see problems differently. You value different strengths. You think beyond the narrow boxes that some people are locked into. That's why immigrant leaders often become innovators. They know how to take the best of multiple worlds and blend them into something stronger. Think about the way Satya and Nadella reoriented Microsoft toward cloud computing and AI. That wasn't just a technical decision. It was a vision decision. It was a leader saying, we're not going to be trapped in yesterday's success. We're going to prepare for tomorrow's battlefield. That's the kind of thinking that comes from having navigated change on a personal level, moving from one country to another, adapting to new environments and thriving in them. That personal adaptability turns into corporate adaptability, and that's where companies either rise or fall. And when immigrant leadership is strong, it creates opportunity for others. When you've experienced being the outsider, you know the value of pulling others in. You know what it feels like to have to prove yourself twice over. That's why many of these leaders make space for diverse teams, global collaboration, and new voices at the table. They're not just running a company, they're reshaping the culture so that others can rise too. And that shift has an exponential effect. One leader influences a team. That team influences a department. That department influences a market. And before long, an entire industry begins to feel the change. But let's not pretend this ripple effect goes unnoticed. It does get noticed, and sometimes it gets resisted. Because when leadership begins to challenge the old ways of doing things, there will always be those who are invested in keeping the old ways intact. Immigrant leaders bring not only skill, but a kind of resilience that unsettles the comfortable. They don't fold under pressure because they've already walked through the fires of transition, uncertainty, and having to earn trust in unfamiliar places. That toughness shows up in the way they lead, in the way they make hard calls, and in the way they refuse to be intimidated by temporary storms. There's also a spiritual truth here. God uses outsiders to shake up the insiders. You see it all through Scripture. Joseph in Egypt, Daniel in Babylon, Esther in Persia. Outsiders who carried wisdom, discipline, and the courage to stand in rooms they were never supposed to be in. And because they carried that, the entire environment shifted. Today, when we see Indian leaders in the top seats of billion-dollar corporations, we're watching that same principle unfold. They didn't just walk in with a resume, they walked in with a worldview shaped by resilience, stewardship, and a sense of responsibility beyond themselves. And here's the thing, the ripple effect doesn't stop at the corporate walls. When these leaders speak, they're heard not just in boardrooms, but in classrooms, in startups, in small towns, halfway across the world, where a young student is thinking, if they can do it, maybe I can too. That influence, that's leadership. And that's why the ripple effect of immigrant leadership is not just about the companies they lead, it's about the futures they ignite, the systems they challenge, and the generations they inspire. Fear is a funny thing. It will dress itself up in all kinds of clothes so it doesn't look like fear. It might call itself concern, policy, warning, or even protection. But if you listen closely, if you look behind the curtain, you'll see that fear often comes when someone recognizes a power they can't control and a capability they can't deny. And that's what happens when certain leaders in the world start talking about the rise of Indians in technology, innovation, and corporate influence. The words may sound political, but the root is often recognition that something unstoppable is in motion. Fear at its core is about perceived loss. When people feel like they're about to lose a position, lose control, lose dominance in a certain space, they start looking for ways to protect what they think belongs to them. That's why you'll hear speeches that sound like warnings. It's not always because of actual danger. It's because of the threat of being displaced. And displacement doesn't have to be physical. It can be intellectual, economic, or cultural. When someone sees a new wave of leadership rising, one they didn't predict or plan for, fear starts whispering, they're taking your place. Now, this isn't new. Fear has always reacted to excellence it didn't expect. Think about Pharaoh when he saw the Israelites multiplying in Egypt. The Bible says he feared they might become too numerous and join his enemies, so he decided to control them. It wasn't because they were doing something wrong, it was because they were doing something right, something powerful, something that couldn't be ignored. In the same way, when people in high positions look at the rise of Indian influence in tech and business, they're not just seeing competition, they're seeing the possibility that the balance of influence could shift. But here's where fear gets exposed. It only shows up when the capability is undeniable. Nobody fears what they believe is weak. If Indian innovation was average, if Indian leadership was mediocre, nobody would be making public statements about it. But the reason it's being talked about, the reason it's being warned about, is because it's proven. Proven in boardrooms, in market shares, in patents, in product launches, in global impact. That kind of track record forces acknowledgement, even from those who wish they could ignore it. Fear also reveals respect in disguise. Deep down, when someone fears your skill, it's because they respect what it can do. They may not clap for you, they may not celebrate you, but their nervousness is the proof that you've made them pay attention. And that's why it's so important to understand the dynamics behind the words. What may sound like criticism might actually be confirmation that you are operating at a level they didn't think possible. And let's be clear, this isn't just about individual leaders like Sundar Pichai or Satya Nadella. It's about the broader picture. The thousands of Indian entrepreneurs launching startups that shake industries. The engineers building the infrastructure for the digital future. The scientists making breakthroughs in medicine and AI. When you see this collective momentum, you start to understand why fear is a natural reaction for those who have grown comfortable in dominance. They know that once momentum reaches a certain level, it can't be stopped. It can only be adapted to. The spiritual lesson in this is simple. Fear in others should not be your signal to shrink. It should be your confirmation to keep going. Because fear in your opponent means your light is shining bright enough to be seen from far away. And sometimes God will allow fear to rise in others as a way of showing you just how far you've come. You may not have noticed your own growth, but their reaction is the mirror that reflects it back to you. If you've read your Bible, you know that nations have always had the power to influence empires. Sometimes it's through military strength, sometimes through wealth, sometimes through wisdom and innovation. And when a nation begins to rise in influence, it doesn't matter how far away it is or how small it looks on the map, the empires start paying attention. That's exactly what we're watching with the rise of Indian influence in the global marketplace. This is not just about individual success stories. It's about a national and cultural force that is shaping the decisions of global power. In Scripture, we see it over and over. Egypt was shaped by the wisdom of a Hebrew named Joseph. Babylon was shaken by the visions of a young man named Daniel. Persia was saved by the courage of a Jewish woman named Esther. In each case, the empire had the size, the resources, and the dominance, but the nation that influenced it had something the empire didn't. A gift, a perspective, a skill set that could not be duplicated. And when the moment came, the empire had no choice but to make room for it. That's the picture of what's happening today in technology, medicine, and business, where Indian minds and Indian leadership are influencing the strategies of some of the biggest empires of our time, multinational corporations. When a nation's influence grows, it doesn't always happen through force. Sometimes it happens through excellence. You can't legislate excellence out of the market. You can't put up a wall high enough to block innovation. If someone builds a product the world needs, the world will find it. If someone creates a solution nobody else can, even the most powerful companies will come knocking. That's why the rise of Indian influence is so significant. It's not dependent on political favor. It's rooted in undeniable contribution. And here's something else. Influence travels faster than armies. A new technology developed in Bangalore can change the way a company in California operates overnight. A breakthrough in medical research in Hyderabad can impact patients in London within weeks. This kind of influence bypasses borders and makes it impossible for empires to remain untouched. That's why leaders in powerful nations watch it closely. They know that in a global economy, influence is leverage, and leverage changes negotiation. But influence is not just about what's produced, it's about the mindset that produces it. The Indians' approach to education, resourcefulness, and adaptability has become part of the global conversation. When an empire sees that a nation can consistently produce leaders who adapt quickly, solve complex problems, and operate with resilience, it begins to adjust its strategies accordingly. That's the silent power of influence. It changes the behavior of the powerful without a single law being passed. There's also a prophetic element to this kind of influence. Nations rise in visibility at appointed times. Sometimes it's after years of obscurity, sometimes after centuries of being underestimated. But when God decides to elevate a people, he positions their gifts in such a way that they can't be ignored. The rise of Indian leaders in the tech industry isn't just an economic story, it's a sign that we're in a season where new nations are stepping into the forefront of global decision making. And make no mistake, when nations influence empires, the relationship is never one-sided. Empires may try to shape nations to their mold, but often it's the other way around. The values, the work ethic, the problem-solving approaches of the influencing nation begin to seep into the empire's culture. You start to see multinational companies adopting practices that reflect the influence of Indian leadership, whether that's in innovation models, management styles, or market strategy. When God gives you influence, it's never meant to be a trophy on a shelf. It's meant to be a tool in your hand. Influence is not about how many people know your name. It's about how many lives are changed because you used what God gave you. And that's where responsibility comes in, because the more influence you have, the greater your accountability before God and before the people your decisions affect. That's why the rise of Indian leaders in global companies is not just a story of achievement, it's a story of stewardship at the highest level, a calling to use that influence for the collective good. Influence is a platform, but a platform without purpose is just wasted space. The question for any leader is not how high have I climbed, but what am I doing with the view from up here? When a CEO sits at the head of a multinational corporation, they're not just making decisions for the people in the room, they're making decisions that ripple out to employees in dozens of countries, to customers across continents, to markets that affect the livelihoods of millions. That kind of reach demands a vision that goes beyond personal success. And here's where cultural heritage can be a blessing. When you come from a background that understands the power of community, that values education not just for self, but for the upliftment of the next generation, you carry those values into your leadership. Many Indian leaders in tech and business have used their influence to invest in innovation hubs, scholarship programs, mentorship opportunities, and cross-border collaboration. They're not just guarding their position, they're creating pipelines for others to rise. That's what it means to turn influence into impact. But responsibility also means resisting the temptation to use influence for self-preservation alone. There will always be pressure to play it safe, to protect the status quo, to align with the power structures that brought you into the room. Yet real leadership understands that influence is at its best when it is used to challenge what is broken, to improve what is outdated, and to open doors that were once closed. That's why the most memorable leaders are not just remembered for their titles, but for the changes they made while they held them. The collective good requires sacrifice. It means sometimes making decisions that won't be popular in the short term, but will be beneficial in the long run. It means standing up for the overlooked, the underpaid, and the underestimated, even if it costs political capital in the boardroom. And when leaders do this, it sends a signal, not just through the company, but through the culture. Influence is not about having more, it's about doing more for others. There's also a generational dimension to this. Influence used well doesn't just change things for today, it sets up blessings for tomorrow. When young people see leaders who look like them, who share their heritage, who have walked a similar path, and who are using their influence to make the road smoother for others, it plants a seed. That seed says not only can you get here, but you can thrive here and help others thrive too. That's how influence multiplies. The spiritual truth is that God never gives a platform without expecting fruit from it. In the parable of the talents, the servants were not praised for holding on to what they had, they were praised for multiplying it. The same principle applies to influence. It's not enough to hold it. You must grow it and release its benefits into the lives of others. And when leaders embrace that, their legacy is not measured by the years they held the title, but by the impact that continues long after they've stepped down.